When your world shifts, it doesn't always feel like a tidal wave. Sometimes it's quieter, like a single light flickering out, just enough to make you notice the room feels darker. That's how it began with Karen, my wife of 10 years. At first, it was subtle, so subtle I told myself I was imagining it. Karen was still Karen in all the usual ways. She woke up early to make breakfast, drove our kids to school, and kept our house running like a well-oiled machine. But then there were the little things. She started wearing makeup more often, even when we were just staying home or running to the store. She'd toss on outfits I hadn't seen in years, ones I thought had been retired, to the back of the closet. I tried not to overthink it. Everyone deserves to feel good about themselves, right? Maybe she was just focusing more on self-care. But then came the late nights. "I've got to stay late at work," she said one evening, slipping into a pair of heels that made her legs look longer, more polished. I noticed she paired them with a blazer she hadn't worn since she got promoted 2 years ago. "Big project deadline," she added, her hand on the doorknob, her voice breezy and casual. Her words didn't sit right with me. Karen worked in HR. While I wasn't an expert, I was pretty sure HR didn't have big project deadlines at 9 o'clock on a Thursday night. But I didn't press. Maybe I was being paranoid. That was my first mistake. Over the next few weeks, the changes in Karen became impossible to ignore. She'd smile at me over dinner, but the warmth that used to light up her face wasn't there. When I cracked my usual corny jokes, the kind that used to make her roll her eyes and laugh, her reactions felt forced. Even her laugh sounded different, shorter, quieter, like she was saving her energy for something else. Then came our anniversary. 10 years of marriage deserved something special, so I booked us a table at her favorite Italian restaurant, the one where she always ordered the chicken marsala. Karen didn't seem as excited as I expected. She dressed up, sure, wore a red dress that hugged her figure perfectly, but her smiles didn't last and she barely touched her meal. "Everything okay?" I asked halfway through the evening. She paused, her fork hovering over her plate. "Just work stuff," she said, her tone clipped. I wanted to dig deeper, to ask what was really on her mind, but the look in her eyes stopped me. They were guarded, distant, like she was somewhere else entirely. That night, as Karen slept beside me, her phone buzzed. Normally, I wouldn't have given it a second thought. Karen was always open with her phone, leaving it on the nightstand or the kitchen counter without a care. But lately she'd been keeping it close, flipping the screen face down whenever I was nearby. I hesitated. Snooping wasn't my style. I believed in trust, in giving someone the benefit of the doubt. But something in my gut told me I needed to look. Sliding out of bed as quietly as I could, I grabbed her phone and unlocked it with the passcode I'd known for years. My stomach knotted as I scrolled through her messages. Most were the usual, group chats with her coworkers, reminders from her calendar. But then I saw a thread with someone named Marcus. The messages were playful, teasing, and just vague enough to make my blood boil. One stood out like a flashing neon sign. "Tonight was incredible. I can't stop thinking about it. Can't wait to see you again." I stared at the words until they blurred. My heart pounded in my chest, loud enough that I thought it might wake her. Karen shifted in her sleep, her lips twitching into a small, dreamy smile. My stomach turned. The next morning I couldn't shake what I'd read. I kept replaying the messages in my head, analyzing every word, every emoji, every punctuation mark. Who the hell was Marcus? And what had happened that was so incredible? At breakfast, Karen hummed a song under her breath as she poured coffee, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. I wanted to ask her right then and there, to demand answers, but I couldn't. What if I was wrong? What if I'd misunderstood the messages? Instead, I decided to dig deeper. If Karen was hiding something, I needed to know exactly what. That weekend, Karen told me she had to attend a work meeting downtown. She kissed me on the cheek and left with the same polished look she'd worn for our anniversary. Sleek heels, bold lipstick, a sparkly clutch. As soon as the door shut behind her, I grabbed my camera bag. Photography was a hobby I'd picked up in college, something I used to unwind after a long day. I had all the equipment I needed, a telephoto lens, a tripod, and enough knowledge to blend in with the background. If Karen was going to meet this Marcus, I wasn't going to let her do it without me knowing. I followed her car into the city, keeping a safe distance. She parked outside a trendy downtown bar and walked inside, her heels clicking against the pavement. I waited 10 minutes before going in after her. Inside, the bar was dimly lit, with warm amber lights casting a cozy glow over the patrons. I spotted Karen immediately. She was sitting in a booth near the back, leaning close to a man I didn't recognize. He had a sharp jawline, dark wavy hair, and a smug grin that made my fists clench. I pulled out my camera and started snapping photos, keeping my distance. Every laugh, every touch, every lingering gaze was captured through my lens. By the time Karen left the bar, my memory card was full, and my heart felt like it had been wrung dry. I followed her home, parking down the street so she wouldn't notice me. When she walked through the front door, she greeted me with a smile, acting as if she'd spent the evening in a boring meeting. "Work stuff go okay?" I asked, forcing my voice to stay even. "Yeah," she said, slipping off her heels. "Just the usual." Her lie hung in the air between us, heavy and suffocating. But I didn't call her out. Not yet. Some men might have confronted her right then and there, demanded answers, yelled and screamed until they got the truth. But that wasn't my style. Karen had chosen to betray me, to lie to my face, to make me question everything we'd built together. She thought she was clever, that she could keep her secret hidden. She was wrong. I wasn't just going to expose her infidelity, I was going to make her regret ever thinking she could fool me. If Karen wanted to play games, I'd show her I could play them better. Only this time I was playing to win. It's strange how betrayal can shift the way you look at someone. Karen, the woman I'd shared my life with for over a decade, now felt like a stranger. Every laugh, every kiss, every mundane interaction between us carried a weight I couldn't ignore. But instead of confronting her outright, I decided to hold on to my anger. I wanted to understand just how deep the lies ran before I made my move. The following week, I became a detective in my own home. I paid attention to the small things. The way she locked her phone the second I entered the room, the way her smile faltered when I asked about her work meetings, and the way she seemed to light up when she thought I wasn't looking, like a teenager with a new crush. Her schedule became a jigsaw puzzle I was determined to piece together. Monday and Thursday nights were her so-called late work evenings, which conveniently lined up with my evenings coaching my son's soccer team. On Saturdays, she'd invented some team-building brunch with her colleagues. I took to following her again, this time with more preparation. I parked a few blocks away from wherever she said she was going, camera in hand, and documented her every move. It became clear that Marcus wasn't just some passing fling, he was a fixture in her life now. One Thursday evening, I watched her meet Marcus at a trendy rooftop restaurant. It was a place we talked about going to for years but never did because we always said it was too expensive. That stung more than I expected. I sat across the street in my car, snapping photos through the rolled-down window. They were laughing, their heads close together. When Marcus reached across the table to brush a stray strand of hair from Karen's face, I felt the bile rise in my throat. I stayed long enough to watch them leave together, Marcus holding the door open for her like he was auditioning for a romantic comedy. They drove off in his car and I followed at a distance. They didn't go far, just to a boutique hotel downtown. When they disappeared through the entrance, my hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I didn't need to follow them any further. I had all the proof I needed. Back at home, I loaded the photos onto my laptop and studied them. The images told a story. Karen smiling at Marcus, touching his arm, leaning into him as if he were the center of her universe. My anger simmered as I scrolled through the evidence. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the audacity. Karen thought she could fool me, that I'd never noticed the cracks in her facade. She underestimated me. The next day, I called in a favor from an old friend of mine, Jake, who worked in graphic design. Jake and I went way back to college and he owed me for helping him out of a tight spot years ago. "What's the project?" Jake asked when I called him. "It's complicated," I admitted. "I'll send you the photos and some notes. Can you help me create something with a lot of impact? Something bold, memorable, and, let's say, symbolic?" Jake chuckled. "You've got me curious now. Send it over and I'll see what I can do." By the weekend, Jake had sent me back a mock-up of what I'd requested. A sprawling collage featuring the most damning photos of Karen and Marcus, arranged with an almost artistic flair. In the center was a bold, ironic caption, celebrating love in all its forms. The collage wasn't just for me, it was the centerpiece of my plan. While Jake worked his magic, I focused on the next phase. Every year, our neighborhood held a big summer block party, and this year Karen had volunteered to help organize it. It was her idea to make it fancier than usual, with a community talent showcase and a small art exhibition featuring local artists. "Wouldn't it be fun?" she'd asked me weeks ago, her eyes sparkling. It was perfect. Karen had been so wrapped up in her affair that she hadn't noticed me volunteering to help with the event logistics. It wasn't hard to arrange for an anonymous submission to the art showcase. My collage printed on a massive canvas. On the morning of the block party, I watched Karen buzz around the venue, charming neighbors and adjusting decorations. She looked beautiful, radiant even, in a flowing sundress that caught the summer breeze just right. If I hadn't known better, I would have thought she was the same woman I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. But I did know better. I spent most of the day mingling with neighbors, keeping an eye on Karen from a distance. Marcus wasn't there, thankfully, but I'd seen enough of him to last a lifetime. When it came time for the art showcase, I stood in the back of the crowd, blending in as people admired the various pieces on display. Paintings, sculptures, and photographs filled the small makeshift gallery, each one labeled with the artist's name or a brief description. Then came the big reveal. One of the event organizers, a cheerful woman named Denise, stepped up to the microphone. "We have a special anonymous submission this year," she announced, gesturing toward the largest canvas in the room. "Let's give it up for, well, whoever created this." With a flourish, she unveiled the collage. The room fell silent. People leaned in, murmuring to each other as they took in the images, the candid snapshots of Karen and Marcus laughing, touching, kissing. Some people gasped. Others stifled awkward chuckles. And then there was Karen. She froze, her face draining of color as she stared at the canvas. For a moment she didn't move, didn't breathe. The shock on her face was everything I'd hoped for and more. What is this?" she stammered, her voice barely audible. I stepped forward, my expression calm and collected. "All that? It's an art piece. A tribute to the love and creativity in our community." Karen's eyes darted to mine, wide with panic. She knew. She knew exactly who had submitted the collage. "Andrew," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What did you do?" "Just contributing to the event," I said with a shrug. "You always said I should put my photography skills to good use." Karen's lips parted as if she wanted to argue, but no words came out. Around us, the whispers grew louder, neighbors exchanging knowing glances. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of power, of control. Karen had played her game, but now it was my turn. And I wasn't done yet. The moment Denise unveiled the collage, the energy in the room shifted. It was as if a ripple had passed through the crowd, starting with quiet murmurs that quickly grew into a hum of disbelief. People shuffled closer to the display, their eyes darting between the incriminating photos and Karen, who stood frozen in place. The silence from her was deafening. She wasn't a woman who was easily flustered. She always had a quick response or an excuse ready to go. But now, nothing. Just wide, panicked eyes and a pale face. I leaned against the wall near the back of the room, savoring the scene. After all, this wasn't just about revenge, it was about balance, a sort of karmic justice for the lies and betrayal. "Is that Karen?" someone whispered nearby. "No way," another voice replied. "But it looks just like her." Karen finally broke out of her trance, stepping forward with trembling hands. "What is this?" she asked, her voice a mix of outrage and fear. Denise, blissfully unaware of the context, smiled brightly. "It's anonymous. Isn't it intriguing? So much emotion captured in these photos." Karen shot a desperate glance toward me. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. The crowd began piecing things together. Faces turned to her, then back to the collage. A few exchanged awkward glances, their expressions torn between amusement and pity. Finally, Karen snapped. She turned to Denise, her voice shrill. "Take it down. Right now." Denise looked taken aback. "But Karen, this is part of the showcase." "I don't care," Karen nearly shouted. "Just take it down?" People stepped back, watching the scene unfold like an unscheduled performance. A few of our neighbors whispered behind cupped hands, their smirks poorly concealed. Karen's charm, her social standing in the neighborhood, was crumbling in real time. I waited a few more moments before stepping forward. "Karen, what's wrong?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral, almost concerned. Her head whipped toward me, eyes blazing. "You did this, didn't you?" I shrugged, feigning innocence. "What makes you think that?" "It's an anonymous submission." Her face turned red. Whether from anger, embarrassment, or both, I couldn't tell. "You think this is funny? Publicly humiliating me like this? Funny?" I echoed, pretending to think it over. "Not exactly. Poetic, maybe. Fitting, definitely." Karen clenched her fists, her breathing uneven. "You had no right." "No right?" I cut her off, my voice rising just enough to silence the whispers around us. "You mean like how you had no right to lie to me? To sneak around behind my back with him?" I jabbed a finger toward the canvas, where Marcus's smug face stared back at us. Karen's mouth opened and closed like she was searching for a rebuttal, but nothing came out. Someone in the crowd finally broke the tension with a quiet, "Yikes." A ripple of nervous laughter followed. Karen's face crumpled. She turned on her heel and stormed out of the room, her heels clicking loudly against the floor. I stayed where I was, letting her go. Chasing after her wasn't on my agenda. Instead, I turned to Denise, who still looked stunned. "Sorry for the drama," I said. "I didn't realize the piece would hit so close to home." Denise blinked, then forced a smile. "Well, art does evoke strong emotions, doesn't it?" "Sure does," I said with a smirk. The party limped along after that, but the mood had undeniably shifted. People avoided eye contact with me, though I caught a few giving me subtle nods of approval. Others whispered in small clusters, likely speculating about the juicy scandal that had just unfolded. It didn't bother me. Let them talk. Karen had worked hard to craft an image of a perfect life, a perfect marriage, a perfect family. Now that image was cracked and the truth was seeping out for everyone to see. When I finally made my way home, I wasn't surprised to find Karen waiting for me in the kitchen. She'd changed out of her sundress into an old sweatshirt, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. For once, she looked like she had no idea what to say. "You've got some nerve," she started, her voice low and shaking. I grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge, taking my time to twist the cap off. "I learned from the best." Her eyes narrowed. "What the hell is that supposed to mean?" "Don't play dumb, Karen," I said, my tone sharper now. "You've been lying to me for months. And don't even try to deny it. I've got the photos, the messages. Everything." Her shoulders slumped slightly, and for a moment I thought she might break down. But Karen wasn't the type to cry easily. Instead, she crossed her arms and glared at me. "So what now? You want a medal for embarrassing me in front of the entire neighborhood?" "No," I said calmly. "I want you to admit it. Admit what you've done. To me, to us." Karen hesitated, her jaw tightening. "It's not as simple as you think." "Oh, it's pretty simple," I shot back. "You cheated. You lied. You made me feel like an idiot while you ran off to play house with Marcus." At the mention of his name, her face twisted in anger, or maybe guilt. "This isn't just about Marcus," she snapped. "This is about us. About what's been missing in our marriage for years." I scoffed. "And instead of talking to me about it, you decided to solve your problems with someone else? Real mature, Karen." She shook her head, looking away. "You don't understand." "You're right," I said, my voice cold. "I don't understand. I don't understand how the woman I married could turn into a liar and a coward." Her head snapped back toward me, her eyes blazing. "Don't you dare call me a coward." "Then stop acting like one," I fired back. The argument spiraled from there, a back and forth of accusations and excuses. By the end of it, Karen was in tears and I was too drained to care. "I'll sleep in the guest room," I said finally, turning to leave. As I reached the doorway, she called after me. "Andrew? I'm sorry." I paused but didn't look back. "I bet you are." Then I walked away, leaving her standing alone in the kitchen. Karen's apology didn't stick with me. It wasn't the kind of heartfelt moment you see in movies where someone finally owns up to their mistakes. It was hollow, the kind of sorry people say when they don't know what else to do. The morning after the block party, the house was eerily quiet. I woke up in the guest room with a stiff neck and a heavy heart, but I wasn't about to feel sorry for myself. If Karen could sleep comfortably after everything that had happened, then I'd be damned if I'd let her guilt, or lack of it, get to me. I found her in the kitchen, sipping coffee at the table. Her eyes were puffy, and her hair was still in the messy bun from the night before. She looked tired but not broken. "Morning," I said, grabbing a mug from the cabinet. She didn't reply. Instead, she stared into her coffee as if the answer to all her problems was swirling around in it. I sat across from her, taking a slow sip before breaking the silence. "So, have you figured out what you're going to say to the neighbors?" Her eyes snapped up to meet mine, sharp and accusing. "You think this is funny?" I shrugged. "Not funny. Necessary." Karen slammed her mug down on the table, coffee sloshing over the rim. "You've humiliated me enough, Andrew. Can we not do this right now?" "Do what?" I asked, leaning back in my chair. "Talk about the consequences of your actions?" "You're right, that's not your strong suit." Her jaw tightened, but she didn't argue. Instead, she wiped up the spilled coffee with a napkin, her movements quick and jerky. The kids came bounding into the kitchen a few minutes later, their cheerful chatter filling the space. For their sake, we dropped the tension, putting on our best imitation of normal. But even they seemed to sense that something was off. Our oldest, Lily, kept glancing between us, her little brows furrowed in confusion. After breakfast, Karen volunteered to take the kids to the park and I didn't argue. I needed the space to think. While they were gone, I went to my office, where I'd stashed the file containing all the evidence I'd gathered. Photos, screenshots of text messages, timestamps, it was all there, laid out like a courtroom exhibit. I wasn't entirely sure what my endgame was yet, But I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let Karen walk away from this unscathed. By the time she came back with the kids, I had a plan. Karen found me in the backyard, sitting on the patio with a notebook in my lap. She hesitated at the sliding door, probably debating whether to approach me or retreat back into the house. Eventually, she stepped outside, her arms crossed defensively. "Can we talk?" she asked. "Sure," I said, setting the notebook aside. "What's on your mind?" She sat across from me, the table between us feeling more like a barrier than a piece of furniture. "I've been thinking," she started, her voice softer than before. "About everything." I waited, letting the silence stretch until she fidgeted under my gaze. "I know I've hurt you," she said finally. "And I know what I did was wrong. But Andrew, you can't just keep punishing me forever. We have to find a way to move forward. For the kids, if nothing else." "Move forward?" I repeated, leaning forward. "Karen, you've been moving forward just fine. I'm the one stuck cleaning up the mess you left behind." Her expression faltered. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." "Of course you didn't," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Cheating is always just a little accident, isn't it? You just happened to trip and fall into Marcus's arms." Her cheeks flushed red, and for a moment I thought she might lash out. But instead she took a deep breath and looked me in the eye. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I'm asking for it anyway. Not for me, for us. For our family." Her words hung in the air, heavy and cloying. I wanted to believe her, to pretend that we could patch things up for the sake of the kids. But every time I looked at her, all I could see were the photos, the messages, the betrayal etched into every detail. "Forgiveness?" I said, shaking my head. "You've got a funny way of asking for it, Karen. You didn't come clean because you felt guilty. You got caught. There's a difference." Her shoulders sagged, and for the first time since the whole ordeal began, she looked genuinely defeated. The kids burst out into the backyard then, their laughter breaking through the tension like a ray of sunshine on a stormy day. Karen quickly wiped her face, putting on a brave smile as they ran up to us. "Can we go swimming later?" Lily asked, tugging on her mom's sleeve. "Maybe," Karen said, her voice wavering. "Let's see how the day goes, okay?" Later that night, as I lay awake in the guest room, I couldn't stop thinking about Karen's words. Did I want forgiveness? Did I want to try to fix things for the sake of the kids? Or was this just another ploy to avoid facing the full weight of her actions? The answer came to me as I stared at the ceiling, my mind replaying the events of the block party. This wasn't just about us anymore. Karen had dragged our family, and by extension our community, into her mess. If she thought a few tears and an apology would wipe the slate clean, she was sorely mistaken. By morning I was more certain than ever. It was time to take things to the next level. If Karen wanted to talk about moving forward, I'd show her exactly what that meant. But first, I had to make sure Marcus wouldn't be a problem anymore. And I had just the idea to make that happen. The morning air was crisp as I sipped my coffee, staring out at the backyard. The kids were still asleep, and the house was steeped in an uneasy calm. Karen had retreated to our bedroom after another awkward dinner the night before, leaving me plenty of time to think. It was one thing to confront Karen about her betrayal. It was another to let Marcus linger in the shadows like a roach, waiting for the dust to settle so he could scuttle back into her life. That wasn't going to happen, not on my watch. By the time Karen emerged from the bedroom, her hair tied in a loose ponytail and her face free of makeup, I was ready to set my plan into motion. "You have any plans today?" I asked, keeping my tone casual. Karen hesitated, probably trying to gauge whether I was setting a trap. "Just taking the kids to Lily's friend's house for a playdate." "Great," I said, standing and rinsing out my mug. "I've got some errands to run to." "Don't wait up." She didn't ask where I was going, and I didn't offer. The first stop on my list was a lawyer's office. I hadn't made any decisions about divorce yet, I wasn't ready to pull that trigger. But I wasn't going to let Karen keep all the cards either. The lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Julie, sat across from me with a legal pad in hand. "What's the goal here, Andrew? Are you looking for legal separation, divorce, or just advice on your options?" "For now," I said, leaning forward, "I just want to know what my rights are. And I need to figure out how to handle a certain third party." Julie's eyebrows lifted. "Are we talking about an affair partner?" "Exactly." She scribbled a few notes before looking back at me. "If you're not ready to file for divorce, my advice would be to keep gathering evidence. Texts, emails, anything that establishes the extent of their relationship. And if he's causing issues or interfering with your family, you may want to consider sending a cease and desist letter. It won't carry the weight of a legal order, but it's a clear warning shot." I nodded, liking the sound of that. And if he doesn't back off? Then we escalate, Julie said simply. After leaving Julie's office, I drove to the downtown boutique hotel where I'd last seen Karen and Marcus together. I wasn't there to cause a scene, at least not yet. I just needed confirmation. I parked across the street and walked inside, trying to blend in with the polished clientele. At the front desk, a young woman greeted me with a practiced smile. Good afternoon. How can I help you today? I'm looking for some information about a recent guest, I said, sliding a $50 bill across the counter. Her smile faltered. I'm sorry, sir, but we have a strict privacy policy. I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice. Look, I'm not asking for sensitive details. I just need to know if a man named Marcus stayed here recently. Tall, dark hair, smug as hell. He was with a woman, a blonde about 5'6". Her eyes darted to the money, then back to me. After a moment, she sighed and palmed the bill. Just a second, she murmured, typing something into her computer. We don't keep guest records indefinitely, but... Yes, he was here last Thursday. Checked in with it. Karen. I clenched my jaw but kept my expression neutral. Thanks. That's all I needed. Armed with confirmation, I made my next move. I had Karen's phone unlocked and copied the text between her and Marcus weeks ago. Now, I forwarded the most incriminating ones to Marcus from an anonymous number. The message read, just a heads up, buddy. You're messing with the wrong family. End it or this all goes public, starting with your wife. That evening, as I sat in the living room pretending to watch TV, Karen's phone buzzed on the coffee table. She glanced at it, her face immediately paling. What's wrong? I asked, feigning concern. Nothing, she said quickly, grabbing the phone and heading toward the kitchen. I followed at a distance, keeping out of sight as she dialed a number. What the hell is going on, Marcus? She hissed into the phone. I just got a message. No, not from Andrew. I don't know who. They have our texts, Marcus. They said they'll send them to your wife. My lips twitched into a grim smile. Bullseye. The argument that followed was heated, though I could only hear Karen's side. She was frantic, her words tumbling over each other as she tried to calm Marcus down. Look, we just have to lay low for a while, she said finally. No calls, no texts. I mean it, Marcus. It's not safe. By the time she hung up, her hands were trembling. When she turned and saw me standing in the doorway, her face hardened. What? I shrugged, my expression carefully neutral. Just checking if you wanted anything from the fridge. Her glare could have melted steel. Over the next few days, Karen's behavior shifted again. She was more distant, more cautious, as if she knew she was walking on a tightrope. And Marcus? He went radio silent. Julie sent the cease and desist letter to Marcus on my behalf, just to drive the point home. I didn't expect him to respond. Cowards like him rarely do, but I wanted him to know that I wasn't bluffing. One evening, as Karen and I sat across from each other at the dinner table, the kids chatting between us, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of satisfaction. The ball was back in my court now, and Karen knew it. Everything okay? I asked, my tone light. She hesitated before nodding. Fine. But her eyes told a different story. She was scared. And that was exactly where I wanted her. For now. The kids were asleep, the house was quiet, and Karen was on edge. 4 days she'd been walking around like a ghost, jumpy and distracted. She wasn't the polished, confident woman who once charmed everyone she met. No, this Karen was unraveling, and I wasn't going to stop pulling the threads. That night, as she loaded the dishwasher, I decided it was time to lay my cards on the table. We need to talk, I said from the doorway, my tone firm but calm. Karen glanced over her shoulder, her hands still clutching a glass. About what? Us, I said simply, stepping into the room and sitting at the kitchen table. Her shoulders stiffened. Slowly, she turned and leaned against the counter, her arms crossed defensively. Fine. What do you want to say? I studied her for a moment, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make her uncomfortable. I think you know where I stand, Karen. I've given you every opportunity to come clean, to own up to what you've done. Instead, you keep lying, dodging, and making excuses. Her jaw tightened. I've apologized, Andrew. I've admitted I made a mistake. Stop calling it a mistake, I interrupted, my voice sharp. Cheating isn't a mistake. It's a choice. A series of choices, actually. And you made those choices over and over again. Karen looked down at the floor, her lips pressed into a thin line. I'm done pretending everything can just go back to normal, I continued. It's not fair to me, and it's not fair to the kids. At the mention of the kids, her head snapped up. Don't bring them into this. They don't need to know. They already know something's wrong, I cut in. They're not stupid, Karen. They can see the cracks even if they don't understand them yet. So don't you dare act like this isn't affecting them. She sighed heavily, running a hand through her hair. What do you want me to do, Andrew? Tell me and I'll do it. Just stop punishing me like this. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. You really want to know what I want? Yes, she said, almost pleading. I want you to admit why you did it, I said, my gaze locking onto hers. No more vague excuses about feeling neglected or unappreciated. I want the truth. Karen hesitated, her eyes darting to the side. I don't know. You do know, I pressed. So say it. For a long moment she said nothing. Then finally she exhaled shakily and met my gaze. Marcus made me feel alive, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. He made me feel wanted in a way I haven't felt in years. And I know that's not fair to you, but it's the truth. Her words were like a punch to the gut, but I kept my expression neutral. And whose fault is that, Karen? If you felt something was missing in our marriage, why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you give me the chance to fix it before you went running to him? She opened her mouth, then closed it again, clearly struggling for an answer. Exactly, I said, my voice hard. Because it was easier to take the selfish route. To chase the thrill instead of putting in the work to fix what we had. Karen flinched, tears pooling in her eyes. I'm sorry, she whispered. Sorry doesn't cut it, I said bluntly. I stood, walking to the counter and leaning against it, towering over her. Here's how this is going to go, Karen. You're going to cut all contact with Marcus, permanently. No texts, no calls, nothing. If I find out you've even thought about seeing him again, we're done. No discussion. She nodded quickly, tears streaming down her cheeks. I already told him it's over. Good, I said, my tone icy. Second, you're going to own up to this. To me and to the people we care about. No more hiding behind excuses or pretending it didn't happen. If you want to rebuild any trust, it starts with honesty. Karen's face twisted in anguish. You want me to tell people? What, our families? The neighbors? Our families at least, I said. And you'd better figure out how to explain the block party to the neighbors too. That's your mess to clean up. Karen sank into a chair, her hands covering her face. For the first time I saw genuine despair in her. I don't know if I can do this, she murmured. You can, I said firmly. Because if you don't, this marriage is over. And I'm not bluffing, Karen. I've already spoken to a lawyer. If you're not willing to put in the effort to fix this, I'll walk away without a second thought. Her head snapped up, panic flashing in her eyes. You talked to a lawyer? Yes, I said. Because I needed to know my options. I'm not going to sit around waiting for you to decide whether I'm worth fighting for. The room fell silent, the weight of my words settling over us like a heavy blanket. Karen wiped her tears, her hands trembling. I'll do it, she said finally, her voice shaky but resolute. I'll do whatever it takes. You'd better, I said, pushing off the counter and heading for the door. Because this is your last chance, Karen. Don't waste it. I left her sitting there, alone with her thoughts. I didn't know if she was truly ready to face the consequences of her actions, but I wasn't going to hold her hand through it. This was her mess to fix, and I was done playing the role of the forgiving husband. As I climbed into bed in the guest room, I felt a strange mix of emotions, anger, relief, and a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, she'd finally start taking responsibility. But even as I closed my eyes, I knew one thing for certain. The old version of us was gone. Whatever came next would be something entirely different. Over the next few days, Karen stayed quiet, as if speaking too loudly might shatter what little control she had left. She was walking on eggshells around me, but I didn't mind. It meant she was finally taking this seriously. The ultimatum had hit her like a wrecking ball. I could see it in the way she flinched every time her phone buzzed or the way she avoided meeting my eyes at the dinner table. But actions speak louder than guilt-ridden glances, and I wasn't going to be swayed by tears and half-hearted apologies. I gave her space, waiting to see if she'd follow through with the promises she'd made that night in the kitchen. By midweek, Karen sat me down after the kids had gone to bed. Her face was pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. I called my mom, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I leaned back in my chair, folding my arms. And I told her what happened, she admitted, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. I told her everything. About Marcus. About the affair. I raised an eyebrow, silently waiting for her to continue. She was devastated, Karen said, her voice cracking. She couldn't believe I'd done this to you, to us. She told me I'd better figure out how to make things right or she wouldn't forgive me either. Smart woman, I said coolly. Karen flinched but nodded. I'm going to tell your parents next. I thought it was only fair to talk to my mom first, but I'll handle it. Her willingness to confess to our families was a step in the right direction, but I wasn't ready to hand her a gold star just yet. Good, I said simply. Anything else? Karen hesitated, her eyes darting toward the living room, where her phone sat on the coffee table. I blocked Marcus, she said, her voice trembling. No calls, no texts. He's gone. Prove it, I said. Her mouth opened as if to protest, but then she nodded and grabbed her phone. She unlocked it and handed it to me, her hands shaking. I scrolled through her messages, her call logs, her social media. True to her word, Marcus was nowhere to be found. If she was hiding something, she was doing a damn good job of it. I handed the phone back. All right, I said. That's a start. The real test came a few days later when Karen stood up during Sunday dinner at my parents' house. It was a casual affair, just us, the kids, and my folks sitting around the table, laughing and catching up. Karen cleared her throat, her face pale as a sheet. I need to say something, she announced, her voice trembling. My mom frowned, setting down her fork. What's wrong, Karen? Karen glanced at me, then back at my parents. I haven't been honest with you. Or with Andrew. There's something I need to confess. The room went silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air. I've made some terrible choices, Karen said, her voice cracking. I've betrayed Andrew in our marriage. I had an affair. My mom's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. My dad sat back in his chair, his face grim and unreadable. You what? My mom whispered, her voice trembling. Karen's tears spilled over, her hands shaking as she clutched the edge of the table. I'm so sorry, she sobbed. I know I've hurt everyone here and I'll do whatever it takes to make it right. I needed to tell the truth. I watched my parents' reactions carefully. My mom looked heartbroken, her gaze flicking between Karen and me as if she didn't know who to comfort first. My dad, on the other hand, was stone-faced. Well, he said finally, his voice low and measured. I hope you mean what you say about making it right. Because actions speak louder than words, Karen. And you've got a long way to go. The drive home was silent, the kids dozing in the back seat while Karen stared out the window. I could tell she was waiting for me to say something, but I wasn't in the mood to offer her comfort. This was the bed she'd made and now she had to lie in it. Later that night, after the kids were tucked in, Karen approached me in the guest room. Thank you, she said softly, standing in the doorway. For what? I asked, not bothering to look up from the book I was reading. For giving me a chance to fix this, she said, her voice trembling. I know I don't deserve it, but thank you. I closed the book and finally met her gaze. You're right, you don't deserve it. But the kids do. That's the only reason you're still here. Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. I'll prove to you that I can change. That I can be better. We'll see, I said, my voice cold. Over the next few weeks, Karen tried to make good on her promises. She threw herself into parenting, spending more time with the kids and going out of her way to include me in everything. She stopped going out alone, stopped dressing up for no reason, and kept her phone in plain sight at all times. It was a start, but it wasn't enough to erase the damage she'd done. One evening, as we sat on the couch watching a movie with the kids, Lily snuggled up to me and whispered, Daddy, I'm glad you're not mad at Mommy anymore. I froze, my heart clenching at her innocent words. What makes you think I'm not mad, sweetie? Because you're sitting next to her, she said simply. I glanced at Karen, who was watching us with tears in her eyes. For Lily's sake, I forced a small smile and pulled her close. I'll always take care of you and your brother, no matter what, I said softly. That night, as I lay in bed alone, I couldn't help but wonder if forgiveness was even possible. Could I ever truly let go of the anger and betrayal? Or was this just the beginning of the end? Only time would tell.